Coach, this is last play of Illinois' 48-45 overtime victory against Indiana this past weekend. A lot of decisions have to be made when you go into overtime, and obviously this was a great decision by Illinois. Let's talk about overtime, but before we do, I hate to tell you all this because I don't want to give you the big head, but you're 10-0. You were 10-0 in 17 years of coaching in overtime. So you know a little bit about overtime, I'm guessing.
I do. A lot of gray hairs and maybe lost a few years off my life. Intense moments, especially when you're on the road. So as we discuss overtime, I think it's great for the viewer. There's some basic rules. The number one is there's a coin flip. We'll get back to that, but you have a coin flip, and it's the most important coin flip of the season in overtime. We'll get back to that. You get one timeout per overtime. The ball starts on the plus 25-yard line, and obviously the objective offense is score.
Right.
If you're playing defense first and you win the toss, that gives you a strategic advantage. That means you now manage the game from knowing how many points. If the opponent gets 3, you need to get 3 or more. If they score a touchdown, obviously field goes out, you have to go for it. So, and then also a couple years ago, the rule changed where once you score after this 9, I think it was a Big Ten too, 9 overtimes.
Right. Illinois, Penn State.
Illinois, Penn State. The safety of players and the reality, you don't want the players out there that long. So after the second one, if you tie again in the first overtime, the second one you got to go for 2. And if it makes it to a third overtime, all they do is put the ball down on the 3-yard line and try to,
right,
which I think is very smart. Anytime you do rules for player safety, that's a good thing.
Do you practice overtime?
So Greg Schiano, defense coordinator for me, obviously a coach either candidate at Rutgers.
Right,
excellent coach. I love the guy. He drove me nuts, Jerry. You've had guys like that. He's assistant coach. Let's practice this, practice this. What about this? What about that? And as a head coach, you know this. You're trying to get these players off their feet and get ready. But he would drive me insane and say, we need to practice overtime. I said, Greg, we practice overtime every Wednesday. It's called red zone. And I would ask him, I said, okay, Greg, on offense, what do you try to do in overtime? And he'd look at me, I go, you try to score. And then I can help you on defense. You know what you do during overtime? You try to stop them. So we're doing this our entire life. So we didn't practice a lot, but we did in red zone.
Gary Barnett and I had the very same conversation. I was like you, and Gary was like Greg. But there is some strategy changes, right? Like
sure.
If you obviously go on defense first, and when you get the ball, you only need a field goal to win. Sure. So doesn't that change things some?
Sure. There's actually 2 scenarios that I kind of came up with that you need a field goal, so you're going to manage the game differently. That means, you know, you're not going to be as aggressive trying to score touchdowns, right, and, you know, you just can't turn that ball over because you're pretty close to. I would always count the 20-yard line as you're in field goal range, regardless of my kicker. That was the line of demarcation. Get to the 20. So you manage the game differently, only need a field goal. You're not as aggressive and certainly not going to go for it on 4th down. The other one is if you can't stop them. You know, you're looking at a 45-42 game. You know, if you think you have the ball and you know your defense in your heart can't stop them, you'll be more aggressive and try to go get it. So that, and then the final scenario is you're outmanned. That's a better team than you, and you made it to overtime. You try to end the game, and Lou Holtz used to say that. What's inevitable? End it now. Right. So if for some reason you're in that scenario where you score and you got a chance to go for 2 and end it, end it. Don't keep going, because at some point the best team will win that game.
Of those 10 overtime victories, one stand out to you?
Yeah, it's coming up here pretty soon too. The rivalry game. In history of that rivalry game has only been 1 overtime. It was in 2016. It went double overtime in the horseshoe. I would say the best defense I've ever coached against, and our players verified it after that game. But that was a wild one, and that game's coming up here pretty soon.
I was at that game. In fact, I wasn't far from your bench. Do you remember?
I know it's coming.
Do you remember your reaction at the end of the game?
No, I don't, Jerry. I don't remember it.
In my household, we refer to that as the flop game.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I think you wound up on the ground. But you got up pretty quick for an old guy.